Hi, I'm the host of Education Beat, Zadie Stavely. This week, we're rerunning an episode from last year that recently won an award for Best Podcast from the California News Publishers Association. It's a story about what California has to learn about bilingual education from another state, Texas. In Wendell Norris Marquez's classroom in Austin, Texas, students are getting ready to read a story in Spanish by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. But first, they're talking about the difference between a story and a novel.
¿Cuál es la diferencia entre un cuento y una novela?
And then, how are stories different from legends?
¿Quién me puede contar cuál es la diferencia entre un cuento y una leyenda según el texto?
Soon, the students have established that stories are fiction. But are legends real? Norris Marquez asks.
Siempre son mentiras. Siempre son ficciones. ¿No? Entonces, ¿son reales o no?
They're both, a student says. They may have started with something real, but then they change over time as they're told and retold. You could easily mistake this for a high school literature class. But these are middle schoolers, and the class is pre-AP Spanish. In 8th grade, these students will be taking AP Spanish before they even graduate from middle school.
When I describe this class, I tell people it's not really what you think in the back of your head as a language course. Because in elementary, the kids already learn Spanish. So by the time they get to us, they're already fully bilingual. So it's about taking them to the next level. So we talk about metaphors and we analyze poems, we write essays.
This kind of class is only possible at the middle school level because most of the students have been attending dual language programs with instruction in both Spanish and English since preschool or kindergarten. And it turns out that's much more common in Texas than it is in California. This is Education Beat, getting to the heart of California schools. I'm Zadie Stavely. This week, why is Texas farther ahead than California in bilingual education? Texas and California have similar numbers of students learning English as a second language, a little more than 1 million in each state. Texas calls these students emergent bilinguals, and California calls them English learners. But Texas enrolls more than twice as many of these students in bilingual education programs than California. 38% of English learners in Texas, compared with 18% in California. Conor Williams, a senior fellow at the Century Foundation, recently published a report comparing Texas and California in bilingual education. Hi, Conor.
Hi there.
So first tell me, why did you want to look this up? Why did you want to compare Texas to California?
Honestly, it began as an effort to chase down one of the big unexplained mysteries of my very narrow field of work, right? That anybody who starts studying bilingual education, English learners, dual language students, eventually stumbles across this reality that Texas has this long and linguistically rich, multilingual, multicultural K-12 history, and California doesn't. And I'm a professional progressive at a progressive think tank. I am left of both political parties by quite some margin. I do not ever have to hand it to conservatives who are in charge in Texas. But I've always been fascinated by this odd reality that they're really good on this one issue.
Why? What is Texas doing differently?
Texas has had a bilingual mandate in place for English learners for about 50 years, a little over 50 years. And frankly, lots of states have this mandate: Wisconsin, Illinois, New York, Connecticut, a handful of others. It's not a particularly exotic policy. Texas is just a lot bigger. Their mandate is your district is above, I think it's 20 English learners who speak the same language in the same grade, then you are required to provide them with some form of bilingual education. California, in the late 90s, I think as many of your listeners will know, banned bilingual education for English learning students, and only in 2016 removed that impediment. So they've only had about 9-10 years to start rebuilding their bilingual and dual language education programs.
Okay, and then the other thing that they're doing differently is funding, correct?
Some years ago, Greg Abbott signed a bill passed by the Republican legislature in Texas that established increased funding for school districts for every English learner and non-English learner that they enroll in some form of dual language education. And the way that it works in Texas, as I understand it, students generate an additional 10% of state education funding if they are English learners. The new bill added another 5% on top of that.
And students who are not English learners also generate funding if they're enrolled in dual language, right?
Yeah, they get the same 5% bonus. They don't get the 10% for being an English learner. They only get the 5% for being enrolled in dual language.
And why should we in California care that Texas is offering more bilingual education to English learners?
The research is unambiguous that bilingual education and especially dual language education are the best way for English learners to succeed at school, linguistically and academically. Not just in terms of maintaining their home languages or accessing math or reading content, but also in terms of learning English. It just works better.
I know you also looked at test scores, mostly the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, to compare the two states and how English learners do, right?
So the wild thing about the NAEP scores was how consistent the story was. Texas English learners in fourth grade outperformed California English learners in fourth grade in math and in literacy over and over and over in 2011, 2013, 2015, 2017, 2019, 2022, 2024, like over and over and over. And that's also true in eighth grade. Over and over again in both math and in literacy or in reading, English learners are doing better in Texas. It's the same if you look at the gaps between English learners and non-English learners on the NAEP scores in California and Texas. The gaps are always larger in California. In terms of acquisition of English, it seems to be on aggregate going better in Texas. In terms of academic performance of English learners, it seems to be going quite a bit better in Texas than they are in California.
And do we know that the better academic performance is directly due to bilingual education?
It's really difficult to say exactly, not least because of just think about all the different variables in education levels and investments in early ed, child poverty levels, those kinds of things. I think every researcher should be very careful, not least because the publicly visible data on this question are limited. The migration patterns into California versus Texas have been different. California had a large wave of immigration in the 80s and 90s, and Texas has had a much larger wave of immigration recently. And that's just to say that the English learners in the two states are not likely to be identical demographically in terms of their recency of arrival, their parents' recency of arrival, their parents' education level, their socioeconomic statuses. There's going to be just a lot of other contributing variables. However, it is consistent with what the research suggests. The research suggests that English learners in bilingual schools will score a little lower in English acquisition and in academics for a couple of years. But by roughly fourth grade, they should be outperforming English learners in English only. So you would expect to see that by about fourth grade, Texas, with its large number of bilingual programs, would start to really outperform California. You would expect that to be especially true by eighth grade. And that's sort of what we see.
Dual language immersion is when you bring together students who speak only English at home with students who speak another language at home, and both learn both languages at school. And unlike some other forms of bilingual education, dual immersion continues throughout at least elementary school, with the goal of children becoming fully bilingual and literate in both languages. Austin has 57 elementary schools offering dual language programs in Spanish, Mandarin, and Vietnamese. One of these schools is Perez Elementary School. In a fourth grade class, before giving a math lesson in English, teacher Yadi Landaverde walks students through how to say some terms in English and Spanish, like acute and obtuse angles.
Acute angle. ¿Cómo se dice acute en español? Agudo o agudo, ¿verdad? Y la que sigue, obtuse. ¿Cómo se dice obtuse? Anguloso. ¿Quién quiere venir a escribirlo? Monte, you want to write that one?
Ms. Landaverde says explicitly teaching the differences and similarities between the two languages is especially important for students who recently immigrated to the U.S. and are not as familiar with English. This year, she has 8 recent immigrants in her class. She says she's seen the benefits of dual language programs.
As long as the first language is strong, they do score higher. Students do tend to score higher in state tests, so I've seen that. But I'm also an advocate for them to keep their main language, right, their native language. So I always tell them that it's not that one's more important than the other, but they're learning simultaneously, right, both languages.
Caroline Sweet is the dual language instructional coach at Perez Elementary.
Ongoing professional development is always really important to us. And then working with each other, we have a peer coaching model we use on campus so that teachers can get into each other's rooms and see what that looks like. But I want to take you to our library.
Caroline shows me the school library, where one corner is dedicated entirely to books the students wrote themselves in both languages. Alongside a book one child wrote about Roblox is a poignant story about a child's journey to the U.S. from Honduras.
The view here is not that dual language instruction is just a delivery model, but it's more of a philosophy and way of teaching. And so it's about making sure that the literature we bring into classrooms represents the students, their lived experiences, their family dynamics, their linguistic repertoire. Making sure that students have abundant opportunities to write and to share their voices, I think, is really important to us as well. And so dual language here is more of a philosophy about being responsive to our community.
Caroline's son Emil is a student here in 4th grade, and he's enthusiastic about bilingual education.
Just being in a dual language program is just the best thing you could do in school because you are learning two languages, and that feels like a superpower for everybody.
Emil's classmate Iker speaks Spanish at home with his parents, who are from Cuba and Mexico, and he's learned English at school.
I like that I can communicate with more people and make more friends.
Other 4th graders are recent immigrants, like Henry Josue.
O sea, cuando yo hablé español, como no entendía mucho inglés, los demás me estaban ayudando.
He says he got a lot of help from his classmates when he didn't understand much English. Luis immigrated to the U.S. 2 years ago from Venezuela, but first attended an English-only school in New York, where he didn't feel like he could communicate with anyone.
When I was in New York, I couldn't understand nobody, and I couldn't talk to nobody. I felt very bad. One time I got home and I was crying because nobody talked to me.
When he moved to Texas and began attending Perez, Luis says he was immediately welcomed.
And when I don't know what to say something in English, I can just ask my friend that speaks more English than me and say, what does this word mean?
Matilda, who's been in the dual language program at Perez since pre-K, says it's helped her keep both languages strong.
My cousins in California cannot speak Spanish, so I need to teach them to learn Spanish because they don't go to a program for bilingual.
To be fair, California does have many bilingual schools. Los Angeles Unified, for example, has more than 230 dual language programs. But advocates for English learners say it's inconsistent across districts. A spokesperson for the California Department of Education said that's partly because California was set back for almost 2 decades when voters passed a law in 1998, Proposition 227, requiring English-only education for English learners. That law remained in place for 18 years, until voters overturned it in 2016. Since then, California published 2 important documents that set out a vision and goals for expanding bilingual education: the English Learner Roadmap and Global California 2030. That last one sets a goal for half of all K-12 students to participate in programs that will help them become bilingual by 2030. Conor Williams says these documents are visionary, but they have no teeth.
They say the right things. However, if they don't have oversight, monitoring, accountability, any kind of force of compliance, at the end of the day, if California misses its targets, nothing happens at all. No one loses their job, no funding goes away. If California districts fail to implement the English Learner Roadmap, as the state sort of is gently encouraging them to do, nothing happens. So that's why they haven't shifted the landscape, is that these are both beautiful vision documents, but they have no ability to shift the activity, the behavior, the resource allocation of adults on the ground.
In 2021, California invested $10 million for grants to expand dual language immersion programs. And in 2022, the state put another $10 million toward grants for helping train teachers in effective language acquisition programs for English learners, including bilingual proficiency. Most recently, the state invested $20 million in a program to help more teachers get bilingual credentials. But advocates say these investments are not sufficient. The biggest challenge in the state, they say, is a lack of bilingual teachers. Conor, you actually mentioned this in your report, right? The difference in bilingual teacher training between the two states.
Yep. If a state like California bans bilingual education for nearly 20 years, teacher training programs in California stopped producing bilingual teachers. They weren't getting the training, the credentialing. And so when English only ended in California in 2016, there wasn't this huge surplus of programs just churning out bilingual teachers anymore. They'd had an entire generation to stop doing it. Meanwhile, in Texas, since it's been 50 years of continuously producing bilingual teachers for the many bilingual and increasingly high numbers of dual language education programs, and there's like an amplifying feedback loop here too, right? Where if you provide bilingual education, it also produces more bilingual graduates and biliterate graduates who then finish your K-12 system and can go off to train to be bilingual teachers.
One of those bilingual graduates in Texas is Jimena Macias. She attended Perez Elementary as a child, and she's now back at her old school as a student teacher while she finishes her undergrad degree. Here she is in a kindergarten classroom, asking the children to break down syllables and words in Spanish.
So vamos a decirlo juntos. Pescado. Pescado. Todos juntos.
When I was little, I loved it here. Yeah, I don't know, I got to learn so much, and it really felt like a community.
Jimena says she almost majored in computer science at college, but she knew deep down that wasn't what she wanted to do. So she switched to bilingual education.
And I feel like something that stuck with me, like throughout the program, is like we have to continue, like passing on our language, passing on our stories, our cultures. We can't let it die. I'm doing it now, and I love it.
So Conor, Jimena is already student teaching while she's an undergrad. And whereas in California, I believe you have to do additional studies after getting your BA in order to get your teaching credential, right?
Yeah. So a couple things. First of all, that's the dream, right? That you graduate bilingual, bicultural, biliterate graduates from your K-12 system who have a sufficiently great experience that they can then go on and maintain that linguistic richness and all of the benefits that come with it as teachers themselves for future generations. You're never going to get the bilingual teacher shortage solved by importing teachers from other countries on 3-year guest teacher visas. It's just not, it's not feasible. Second of all, we have very little research suggesting that almost any element of the U.S. teacher training, credentialing, and licensure systems improve student outcomes reliably. We do have one reliable research consensus that it comes to bear here. And that's that every new credentialing, training, licensure, student teaching, teacher prep requirement that we put on potential teachers, we reduce teacher diversity. We know that. That happens every time. I think across the two states, California has some things to learn for sure, not just from Texas, but from lots of different places that have explored ways to try to allow more bilingual teacher candidates access to the classroom.
Wendell Norris Marquez, the 7th grade teacher who we heard from at the very beginning of this episode, says his own bilingual education helped prepare him as a teacher.
It does help in my personal case that I grew up in Puerto Rico and I myself was an AP Spanish student back in the day. So growing up, I was already very familiar with the curriculum in the way that we have developed it. There is a little bit of nostalgia. Advanced Spanish was probably one of my favorite class ever. And I felt that class opened my eyes and my way to see life in a way that shaped the rest of my life. And the idea that I could do that for my students really excites me.
In Austin, students who have attended dual language programs in elementary school can also enroll in dual language at 13 middle schools and 5 high schools, where they take at least 2 classes a semester in Spanish. One is a language arts course in Spanish, and the other is a content class like science or math. Many schools also have electives available in Spanish, like film or web design. By 8th grade, students take AP Spanish. Antonia Vincent teaches this class at Lively Middle School. When I visit, the students are discussing challenges in their community, unemployment, drought, drugs, the high cost of living. Vincent asks students to discuss the benefits of living in Austin.
Hacen muchas cosas buenas como hacen donaciones a unas causas que ayudan a niños en otras partes y ayudan a las personas a agarrar más, a tener un techo.
Okay, muy bien. Vamos a ver.
The majority of these students have been enrolled in bilingual programs since elementary, but some of these students are recent immigrants. Ms. Vincent says advanced classes in Spanish can be empowering for them.
There are some of them, like at the beginning, they are very shy. This class empower them because they feel that we listen to them and they are building their confidence. The beginning, they don't even believe it that they can do an AP class, and they don't understand, most of them, what is an AP class. At the end, we have good results, and they are very proud of themselves. I tell them, when you receive your email saying, congratulations, you passed the exam, you're going to feel so happy.
So, Conor, why is it important that schools like this one in Austin include recent immigrants in the dual language programs?
I think it's encouraging that they're including newcomers, not least because the reason that dual language seems to work as well as it does, why it's the gold standard, is because it relies on the language abilities of the students to be part of the academic experience. So if, like me, you started studying Spanish as a 7th grader, and your really good-hearted, really nice, really great Spanish teacher was a guy named Scott, who minored in Spanish at a really fine Midwestern college, you're not going to learn a lot of Spanish. It's just really difficult when you're sitting there practicing vocabulary cards. But if it's the only way to talk to the kid at the next desk, it's the only way to coordinate the soccer game at recess, you got to step it up. And it's the same thing here. When you add newcomers who are genuinely brilliant speakers in their native language, pure, really excellent Spanish speakers, that's going to elevate your language acquisition as an English dominant kid. And your English skills that you bring to the classroom are going to benefit these newcomers in acquiring English as well. It works on some of the same principles as the peer effects of any kind of school integration, that all kids bring valuable cultural, linguistic, socioeconomic, any number of characteristics to school that can benefit other kids by being around them, by engaging those. Diversity is a strength, and language is no different.
Thank you so much, Conor.
Hey, thank you.
Caroline Sweet, the dual language instructional coach at Perez Elementary, has seen the benefits of bilingual education firsthand. Her older son went through dual language at Perez, then attended Lively Middle School, where Antonia Vincent and Wendell Norris Marquez teach, and he's continued in dual language in high school.
His advanced Spanish courses in high school are so hard that when I look at those texts, I'm like, I do not know what that medieval poem means. But I think, it's just kept him pretty astute and paying attention to language. And then just kind of really flexible in his brain and the way he moves about school.
Caroline says there's another benefit, too. Her son has a diverse friend group with kids who speak both languages with varying ability.
That felt important to us so that his social interactions were bilingual as well. And I definitely hear that when he's on the phone of there's some friends he speaks all in Spanish to, some friends he switches back and forth, some who only speak English. And then I think there's moments where he's the bridge in the social group, right? To make sure everybody is communicating.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Education Beat, getting to the heart of California schools, a production of EdSource. You can find a link to my story about Texas bilingual education in our podcast notes and at edsource.org. Our producer is Kobe McDonald. Special thanks to our guest, Conor Williams, and especially to the teachers, staff, and students I spoke to in Texas, Wendell Norris Marquez, Antonia Vincent, Yadi Landaverde, Jimena Macias, Caroline Sweet, Emil, Henry Josue, Iker, Luis, and Matilda, and to everyone else behind the scenes who helped facilitate my visits. Thanks also to editor-at-large John Fensterwald. Our theme music is from Blue Dot Sessions. This episode was brought to you by Sobrato Philanthropies. I'm Zadie Stavely. Join us next week and subscribe so you won't miss an episode.